They were still chewing when I reached into my purse. Not for my phone, not for a tissue, for an envelope. One I had printed 3 months ago and promised myself I'd never use. If you've ever sat at a table full of people who smiled at everyone except you, subscribe to Revenge with Seren. Because sometimes dignity doesn't come from approval. It begins with a refusal to be erased. I didn't speak loudly. I didn't cry. I just slid it onto the center of the table, right between the candied walnuts and the decanted Bordeaux, until it stopped in front of my father. The same man I had spent 32 years trying to impress. The same man who just raised his glass and called me a loser in front of 40 guests. The envelope didn't shake when I let go of it. I had rehearsed this moment in my mind too many times to let my hands betray me now. It was Father's Day. And instead of giving him the Mercedes, I'd bought the one parked outside, the one I foolishly believed would be the bridge between us. I was giving him the truth. My truth. It hadn't started at the dinner table, though it might have ended there. It started weeks earlier when I wired nearly a year's worth of post-tax salary to a dealership in Boston. For a sleek black Mercedes S-Class. A car he once admired while we were leaving a country club function, saying, "Now that is success." I wanted to be that success. Not for the world. Not even for myself. For him. Because no matter how many deals I closed, no matter how many late nights I spent building financial models and climbing the ranks, my father always found a way to remind me that it wasn't enough. He praised my older brother James like he was a prototype of masculine perfection, real estate football, 2 kids, perfect wife quarterly bonuses. He adored my younger sister Sophia, calling her gracious and wise for staying close to home, marrying early, volunteering on local boards. And me, the daughter who left. The one who went to Cornell instead of his alma mater. The one who got promoted at Goldman Sachs and moved to Manhattan. To him, I was the one who thought she was too good for tradition. I thought the car would change something. I really did. The night before the reunion, I drove it over to his house. He examined it like it was a property listing. Circled it twice. Asked about taxes. Commented that the steering felt too sensitive. Then tucked it into the garage hidden from the world. Like me. I stayed in a hotel that night. Called my best friend Taylor. She told me to return the car and never look back. But I told her I'd wait until the reunion dinner. One last try, I whispered. The next day was typical Matthews theater. Chandeliers polished. Linen napkins starched. My father holding court like a senator on campaign. He paraded that car up and down the driveway for his business associates like it had been his achievement. Never once said my name. Never once mentioned the gift. I tried to laugh it off. Tried to pretend it didn't sting. Until dessert. Until he stood at the head of that 20-person table and gave a toast. He praised James for his new condo project. Praised Sophia for her work with the Children's Hospital. Then paused. "I'm proud of all my children," he said, raising his glass. And for one fragile second, I believed I was included. Except for the loser sitting at the table, he added with a casual smirk. People laughed, softly, uncertainly. Some thought it was a joke, others knew better. The silence after was deafening. It filled every corner of that ancestral dining room like smoke. I didn't cry. I didn't speak. I reached into my purse. And that's where this part began. The envelope contained DNA test results. 3 months earlier, I had submitted samples to a genetic service just for fun. But the results didn't align. I wasn't biologically related to the man who had raised me. Not in blood. I didn't confront anyone right away. I waited. I watched. I double-checked. I even took hair from his brush during a short visit and had it tested separately. Same result. Richard Matthews wasn't my father, but he was the man who spent decades making me feel like I didn't belong. Now I knew why. The weight of that truth had sat in my purse all night silent, as the second fork in the place setting. Until that toast. Until that moment. He called me a loser. I gave him a paternity test. He hadn't even opened the envelope yet. He just stared at it like it might bite him. I looked across the table. James had stopped chewing. Sophia looked like she might cry. My mother. She already knew. I picked up my water glass, not for a toast, just a sip, and said calmly, "Happy Father's Day." Then I stood. The envelope still between him and the truth, and I walked out. Have you ever stood at the edge of a family you were born into, only to realize you were never really part of it? Tell me below. Maybe you'll help someone else feel less alone. It started with a bonus. Not a huge one by New York standards, but enough to make me feel like the years of missed vacations and late-night Excel models had meant something. I had just been named Senior Investment Strategist, the youngest in the firm's history. No silver spoon, no backdoor introductions. Just 2 degrees, 8 years of relentless work, and a name that had opened exactly 0 doors for me. I stood in my new Manhattan apartment, a quiet, sunlit place I'd dreamed of since I was 23, and stared at the wire transfer confirmation. The Mercedes dealership in Boston had accepted payment in full. A car. Not just any car. His car. Sleek black S-Class. Top-tier package. Premium leather. Massaging seats. Even the exact wood trim he once pointed out at a country club brunch, saying, "That's how you know someone's made it." I had made it, and all I wanted pathetically was for him to see it. I convinced myself it wasn't desperation, that it was grace. That giving him the car wasn't an act of submission, but a gesture of peace. I hadn't told anyone at the firm, not even my assistant. Only Taylor knew, and when I told her over wine, she paused so long, I thought the connection had dropped. "Eliza," she finally said, "you are literally buying his love. You know that, right?" I nodded. "And if it works?" She didn't answer. That Saturday, I left Manhattan early, dressed like I wasn't trying. Just jeans, a clean blouse, minimal makeup. But inside, I was wound tight with 30 years of unmet expectation. The car was waiting at a dealership near my parents' home in Lexington. I had arranged for the delivery days in advance, triple confirming every detail. When I pulled into their driveway, it was nearly 4 p.m. My mother was out perfect. That was intentional. I wanted this to be a private moment, just him and me. No audience, no buffer. He opened the door after 2 knocks, wearing pressed chinos and a navy sweater as if hosting a client. "Eliza," he said, glancing at his watch. "The reunion's not until tomorrow." "I know." My throat tightened. "I brought your Father's Day gift early." He looked confused, then suspicious. I handed him a box no bigger than a wallet wrapped in simple navy paper. Inside was the key. Just the key. When he lifted the lid and saw the silver Mercedes emblem, his eyebrows lifted. "Is this—" "Come look," I said, gesturing toward the driveway. The car sat under the dappled shade of the maple trees, its black surface gleaming like onyx. For a moment, just a moment, I saw something in his face that looked like pleasure. Then it vanished, replaced by calculation. "This is excessive," he said, even as he pocketed the key and walked briskly toward it. He circled it twice, running his fingers along the trim opening the driver's door like a man appraising an acquisition. "What's the financing?" he asked. "It's paid off," I said. "With your bonus," I nodded. "And savings." He climbed inside, adjusted the seat, checked the dash. When I slid into the passenger seat, the new leather scent wrapped around me like a ribbon. I smiled, waiting for something. A nod. A thank you. Anything. "You could have leased." he muttered, pulling out onto the road. These depreciate fast. We drove for 10 minutes. He tested the acceleration, the turn radius, even muttered something about the stereo system. Then turned back. Steering feels a bit loose, he added. Not German engineered the way it used to be. He parked it in the garage. Not the driveway. Not where the neighbors could see it. Not where anyone arriving for the reunion would think he had purchased it himself. In the garage. Hidden. When he got out, he tossed the key onto the workbench beside the rake he never used. Well, he said as if clearing his throat. You must be doing well to waste money like this. That was his thank you. I wanted to scream. Instead, I smiled. A tight professional one. I'll see you tomorrow, I said and left. That night, I called Taylor from my hotel room. The second I said hello, I burst into tears. Quiet ones. The kind you cry with your back pressed against the headboard and your hand covering your mouth. He parked it in the garage, I whispered. Like it was nothing. You need to return it, she said immediately. You need to take it back, Eliza. He doesn't deserve it. I shook my head, even though she couldn't see me. No, I'll wait. Maybe tomorrow he'll say something. Maybe in front of everyone. Taylor was quiet. Then came her warning. You still carrying that test in your purse? Yes. Eliza, promise me you won't use it. Not unless you're ready for fallout. Like nuclear fallout. I won't, I lied. But I felt its weight already. Like it was burning a hole through the lining of my bag. The next morning, I curled my hair and put on the navy blue dress I had chosen 3 weeks ago. Not flashy, not plain, the perfect balance of feminine strength. The drive to my parents' estate was slow. I circled the block once before turning in. And there it was. The Mercedes. Not in the garage, not tucked away. It sat in front of the house, angled deliberately, gleaming, immaculate, like he'd bought it himself. He hadn't even thanked me, but he wanted everyone to see it. That's when I knew I wasn't a daughter to him. I was marketing collateral. Have you ever tried to earn love by giving more than you could afford, only to realize it was never love they valued? Tell me below. I'm listening. By the time I walked into the grand foyer of my parents' estate, the reunion was already in full performance mode. Chandeliers sparkled, crystal clinked. Every hallway smelled faintly of roses and expensive catering. The room buzzed with rehearsed laughs and rehearsed stories delivered by people who had known each other all their lives, but only met like this once a year over Chardonnay and social competition. I paused near the coat rack, smoothing the fabric of my navy blue dress, rehearsing lines in my head like I always did. Yes, still in New York. Yes, work is going well. No, I'm not married yet. As if on cue, my mother appeared, arms open, smile radiant. You look beautiful, darling, she said, hugging me tightly. Your father's in the back garden with the Peterson group. Her voice lowered just slightly, like she was giving a weather warning. I nodded and stepped inside. My heels clicked softly against the marble floor as I entered the main room. Faces turned, some familiar, some vaguely familiar, some clearly here for business, not blood. A few aunts gave air kisses. My Uncle George clapped my back and said, "There's our Wall Street wizard." The title made me smile until I remembered who else might hear it. Sure enough, my father entered moments later through the garden doors. 3 men flanked him, all in navy suits, all laughing too loudly. They looked like the kind of men who smiled at their reflections and called their daughters kiddo. My father's eyes swept the room. He nodded to some cousins, gave a tight smile to a second cousin twice removed. Then he saw me. His eyes didn't narrow. His expression didn't shift. He nodded exactly the same way he had for everyone else. Then he walked past me without a word. I turned toward the drink station, desperate to hide the flush crawling up my neck. Sophia, my younger sister, intercepted me halfway, her arms wrapping around me in a soft, familiar hug. "I heard about your promotion," she whispered, eyes sparkling. "That's amazing, Liz. Seriously, she was the only one who still called me that." "Liz." "Thanks," I murmured. She looked around, then handed me a glass of white wine. "He's been parading that car all morning. 3 different tours." "What, he's showing it off to his business friends," she said, watching my face carefully. "Telling them all about the features. Even let one guy sit in the back seat. He didn't mention I bought it." Sophia didn't answer. I sipped the wine. Crisp, cold, bitter. "I just wanted him to see me," I said softly. "To finally, I don't know, acknowledge I made something of myself." Sophia squeezed my arm. "That's not pathetic. That's human." But her expression said what we both knew. It wouldn't happen. Not the way I hoped. By dinner, the performance reached its peak. Everyone filed into the dining room. 20 chairs, impeccable china, fresh flowers, gold-rimmed name cards with perfect calligraphy. I was seated between a cousin's husband and one of my father's business interns. James, my older brother, and his family sat directly beside our father. Perfect placement for the golden child. The first 2 courses passed in a blur. Polite laughter, carefully measured conversation. My father controlled the rhythm of the table like a maestro, redirecting any stray topics back to business real estate legacy. I watched, I listened, and I waited. The moment came just after the main course was served. James had been telling a story about a strip mall in Cambridge he'd recently acquired, turning it into luxury condos. The initial investment looked risky, he said, but I saw the potential. Everyone else missed it. My father leaned back, glass in hand. "That's the Matthews instinct," he declared. "Seeing opportunity where others see failure. It's in the blood." I felt it like a punch. In the blood. I touched my purse under the table, the envelope still there, sealed, waiting. The conversation turned toward me. Briefly. "Eliza, my Uncle Robert said I heard you moved up at your firm's senior investment strategist," I replied, smiling politely. "That's impressive." Before I could elaborate, my father cleared his throat. "It's a good stepping stone position," he said, "but finance is unstable. Not like real assets, property, something that lasts." He turned to James again. "Real assets withstand market fluctuations," he added. "They persist through generations." The pivot was flawless. The implication was louder than any insult. I kept my expression neutral, drawing on years of boardroom training. "Actually," I said, "our division just generated 38% returns last quarter, outperforming the market by 22 points. My risk assessment model." "Numbers on paper," he interrupted, waving a hand. "We'll see how it holds when the next recession hits." Then turning to one of his colleagues. "Speaking of property values, what's your take on the zoning changes near Cambridge?" I stared at my plate. My hands were steady. My voice had been calm. But inside, the dam cracked. I don't remember who started speaking after my father's zoning comment. Maybe it was James, or maybe one of the Peterson men, smoothly shifting the conversation to property tax or interest rates. Anything but the silence that had settled after I corrected my father with facts he had no interest in hearing. I smiled politely and nodded through it, but inside something cracked. I knew that crack. I had lived with versions of it for most of my life, but this time it didn't seal back up. I excused myself, murmuring something about needing more wine, and slipped out of the dining room into the hallway where the air felt cooler, less rehearsed. The envelope in my purse felt heavier than before, like it was gathering momentum with every humiliating moment that passed. I didn't need to read what was inside, I already knew. But my fingers brushed the flap anyway, Still sealed, still clean, still dangerous. I had ordered the test months ago, not because I suspected anything in particular, but because I was bored one weekend and curious about my ancestry. A friend at work had gotten a DNA kit for fun, and I figured, why not? I spat into a vial, mailed it off, and forgot about it. Until the results came in. Most of the report was predictable European ancestry, some distant Scottish relatives, a few odd percentages I didn't think much of. But then came the suggested matches. None of them aligned with the paternal side I knew. No uncles, no cousins from my father's family, no Matthews at all. I stared at the screen for an hour, then 2. I logged out, logged back in, emailed the company to confirm my account hadn't been mixed up. It hadn't. I didn't tell anyone, not at first. It felt absurd. It had to be a mistake. Until I went home that weekend and stood in the family kitchen, watching my father take off his watch and place it in the tray by the door like he always did. I realized he had never touched me. Not really. Not in the way fathers did. He shook hands, patted shoulders. He'd never hugged me like he hugged James. He'd never once rested a hand on my back or kissed my forehead or even reached for my hand on a hard day. Not even when I cried. A week later, during another short visit, I found strands of his hair on his bathroom sink. I collected them, quietly, like a thief in a home I thought was mine. I sent them to a private lab, paid extra for expedited processing. 10 business days later, the results confirmed what the first test had only implied. Richard Matthews was not my biological father. I stared at that envelope for 3 hours the day it arrived. I didn't open it right away. I already knew, but I needed to see the words to know that science had spoken the truth my heart had always suspected. I carried that envelope in my purse every day for 3 months. It went to work with me, sat on the passenger seat of my car, slept in the drawer of my nightstand. It came with me on flights through TSA checkpoints, into restaurants and conferences, and girls' nights and solo walks through Central Park. I didn't show it to anyone. Not Taylor, not Sophia, not even myself after sealing it. Because carrying it was different from confronting it. Some days I told myself I didn't need to say anything, that knowing the truth was enough, that there was power in silence. But other days, I imagined the moment, the look on his face, the unraveling of his pride. And then I'd push the thought away again like a dangerous flame. That's what I was doing now in the hallway outside the dining room while everyone else talked about market forecasts and zoning permits. I leaned against the wall and inhaled slowly, like my breath could settle the earthquake in my chest. I didn't want to ruin the dinner. I didn't want to become the story they whispered about for years to come. But I didn't want to leave with this ache sitting under my skin for another year or another 30. As I turned to head back toward the dining room, I heard it. His voice, not from the table, from his study. The door was slightly ajar. The car, my father said, laughing lightly. Yes, quite an upgrade. You know, when you work hard like I have, you earn luxuries like that. Walter Peterson replied with a chuckle. Eliza told me she bought it for you. Said something about a promotion in New York. A pause. Then my father's voice again, smooth and measured. She's always been desperate for attention. Her success comes from the education I gave her, the principles I instilled. The car was her way of proving she's finally applying what I taught. Every word landed like a blow. She's always been desperate. My success wasn't mine. The car wasn't a gift, it was a performance. The envelope in my purse pulsed like a heartbeat. I backed away from the door before they could notice me. My face burned. My hands felt icy. That was the moment. Not the years of silence. Not the cold shoulders or condescension. Not even the zoning speech that reduced my career to a risk. It was the way he laughed while dismissing me. Like I was a clever employee, not a daughter. A project. Not a person. That was when I stopped hoping for dignity and started preparing for clarity. The plates had been cleared. Coffee was being poured into delicate china cups, the kind we only ever used once a year twice if someone important died. Brandy followed. Father's favorite. He always insisted on pouring it himself, as if ritual somehow justified control. He stood behind his chair, swirling the amber liquid in his snifter, like he was casting a spell over the table. His silence alone was enough to command attention. A hush fell over the room. All conversations slowed, eyes shifting subtly in his direction. I knew what came next. The speech. Every year he gave a version of the same monologue, some blend of family legacy and personal pride, with carefully placed praise and strategic omissions. It wasn't about affection. It was about order, status, power. Before we moved to the garden for our family photo, he began, "I'd like to take a moment to reflect on what the Matthews family has accomplished." The room stilled. "I'm proud to say we are not just a family, we are a legacy." He gestured to James, first lifting his glass. To James, whose real estate ventures continue to impress. The Riverside project has already been featured in the Boston Business Journal, an ambitious, future-focused endeavor. Everyone raised their glasses. James looked modest, but I knew him too well. That twitch at the corner of his mouth wasn't humility. It was victory. Then Father turned to Sophia. And to Sophia, who shows us that grace and community leadership are not mutually exclusive. Her work on the hospital board brings true prestige to our name. Another toast. Another round of applause. I waited for it. The pivot. The silence. The erasure. He turned toward me last, his face thoughtful. And as I consider the broader definition of success, he continued, voice mellow from the brandy, "I recognize that sometimes achievement looks different." I felt my pulse skip. Was he finally going to? "I'm proud of all my children," he said, raising his glass again, "except for the loser sitting at the table." It landed like a gunshot. A stunned silence rippled through the guests. Someone let out a nervous laugh, quickly stifled. A fork clinked against a plate. All eyes turned toward me, some confused, others embarrassed. A few looked away. I didn't move. Father took another sip of brandy as if he'd merely cracked a harmless joke. "Some people chase titles," he said, "salaries, paper success. But true legacy comes from building brick by brick on family foundations." His gaze cut through me. Not just cold, calculated. He knew exactly what he was doing. My mother's napkin was crumpled in her lap. Her jaw tight, her eyes lowered. Sophia looked visibly shaken. Rachel, our cousin, reached across the table and touched my hand, but I barely registered it. I was watching him. Richard Matthews. The man who had never hugged me at a graduation. Who had never said the words, "I'm proud of you." Who had just called me a loser. In public. And suddenly, something inside me broke quietly, cleanly. Like glass cracking under pressure. I reached for my purse, still resting beside me on the floor. My fingers found the envelope. I stood. Every eye followed me. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't shout. But I looked directly at him and said, "Thank you, Father, for that illuminating speech." The sarcasm wasn't sharp. It was precise. Like a scalpel, not a knife. I've spent 32 years trying to meet expectations that shift every time I get close. Tonight, I finally understand why. I held up the envelope. No drama, no flourish, just an outstretched hand and a sealed truth. I graduated top of my class. I built a career in a city where no one knew my last name. I now lead a division responsible for over $180 million in assets. A beat. But somehow you still see me as a disappointment. The room had gone completely silent. Even James wasn't smirking anymore. I thought buying you a car might be a bridge, a gesture. But tonight, you made it clear your respect is conditional. And it has never included me. I placed the envelope on the center of the table, right where his toast had started. For you, I said. Happy Father's Day. And I walked out. I didn't run. I didn't cry. I just walked. The way you walk when something heavy has finally been put down. The way you walk when your shame is no longer yours to carry. Outside, the air was warm and still. The kind of June evening that pretends to be peaceful. I didn't care that my heels clicked against the flagstone too loudly. I didn't care who followed or didn't. I just knew one thing: he could spin my story however he wanted. But I was done being edited. The dining room shimmered under the antique chandelier, a soft, golden hue cast across crystal and cutlery, as dessert was served: tiny, flourless chocolate cakes crowned with raspberries, each one perfectly identical, like the roles we all played in that room. By then, my heart had quieted, not because I felt calm, but because I'd crossed a line I couldn't walk back from. The words in the study echoed inside me, turning over like coals under a flame. She's always been desperate for attention. He didn't see me. Or worse, he did. And he saw nothing he respected. I sat down at the table with my hands in my lap, fingers wrapped around the envelope still tucked in the side pocket of my purse. My spine was straight, my face composed. I could feel the eyes of the business guests scanning the room again, waiting for the next performance. No one knew they were about to get one. Coffee arrived. Brandy followed. My father stood again. He always delivered a second speech once dessert began, more personal, more pointed. This time was no different. The room went still with expectation. He raised his glass. Before we disperse for photos, I'd like to say something about the people seated around this table. I held my breath, not because I hoped, but because I knew what came next. To James, he said, motioning toward my brother. You continue to prove that Matthews' men build lead and take bold risks. I'm proud to see the Riverside Project already catching national attention. Everyone clapped. James nodded humbly. I didn't look at him. And Sophia? He continued, your work with the Children's Hospital and your family values remind us that leadership doesn't always come from profit margins. You lead with compassion, and that too brings honor to this name. More applause. Then came the pivot, that practiced pause, that slight narrowing of the eyes before he continued. And finally, as I reflect on success, I'm reminded it comes in many forms. Some chase titles, chase recognition, forgetting that real achievement is built on sacrifice, not spotlight. A pause. I'm proud of all my children, he said, except for the loser sitting at the table. Laughter scattered through the room like broken glass, some confused, some awkward, some genuine, from those who assumed this was a family joke. But I knew, and so did he. His brandy swirled in his glass. He took a slow sip, never breaking eye contact with his drink. Then the speech pivoted again, to legacy, to tradition, to the value of building something tangible. But I didn't hear the rest. The sound of blood was rushing in my ears. Not because of the insult, but because I wasn't hurt anymore. I was done. I reached into my purse, pulled out the envelope, and laid it down on the table in front of me. It made the faintest whisper of a sound, just enough that the people nearest turned to look. I watched the confusion dawn on my mother's face, saw Sophia's eyes widen. James froze. His fork hovered midair. My father continued, unaware, or pretending to be. I stood. He paused, annoyed at being interrupted. "Eliza?" he asked, as if I were a child speaking out of turn. I pushed my chair back slowly, the legs scraping just enough to pull every gaze in the room. "Thank you, Father," I said, my voice calm, "for that illuminating assessment." He stared at me, eyes narrowing. I've spent 32 years trying to meet standards that were never meant for me. Tonight, I finally understand why. I held the envelope up not like a weapon, but like a certificate of release. This contains a paternity test, one that confirms what I think you've always known. The room froze. Silence roared louder than his speech. "You're not my biological father," my mother gasped, a real one sharp, ragged, involuntary. Sophia's hand flew to her mouth. James said nothing. My father didn't move. His jaw clenched, his eyes unreadable, but I saw it. That tiny flicker of recognition. Not shock. Confirmation. For most of my life, I continued. I've blamed myself for the distance, for the lack of warmth, for the endless measuring and falling short. But I see now, it was never about who I was. It was about who I wasn't. I stepped forward and placed the envelope squarely at the center of the table, on top of his monogrammed place card. "You knew," I said softly, "and you punished me for it." He didn't answer. I looked at the guests, extended family associates, the ones who'd smiled and clapped and nodded through all his speeches. "I bought him a car this week," I said with a smile that wasn't bitter, just clear. Not because he earned it, but because I still thought, maybe I could earn something back. I glanced at the envelope. I was wrong. And then I turned to leave. I walked slowly past the bay windows, past the servers frozen near the kitchen doors, past the ancestors painted on the walls, whose judgment I no longer feared. The sound of a chair scraping behind me. My name whispered, panicked, from my mother. A thud. Maybe someone standing, maybe someone sitting down. I didn't look back. Outside, the air smelled like early summer and cut grass and lilac. I exhaled into it, letting my shoulders drop for the first time all night. The porch lights glowed behind me. I reached the driveway. The Mercedes sat exactly where he'd parked it for display. And for the first time since I bought it, I didn't think of it as his. I pulled the spare fob from my purse and unlocked the car. The chirp was crisp. Final. Sliding into the driver's seat, I let the leather envelope silence me one last time as I rested it on the passenger seat beside me. Then I started the engine. Back inside the house, I imagined him staring down at the table at the envelope with his name in the DNA section, struck through with the word, "Not a match." The engine of the Mercedes hummed beneath me with the kind of quiet confidence I had spent my entire career trying to build. Smooth, unbothered, controlled. It was the opposite of everything unraveling behind me in that house. I drove slowly at first, not because I was uncertain, but because I wanted to feel every inch of distance growing between me and that dining room table. Between me and the man who moments ago had looked at my career and called it chasing titles. Between me and the performance I had been cast in since birth, a role that was never mine to play. The truth was out, not shouted, not weaponized, just laid bare. And in that stillness I had found more power than I ever did in a corner office or a perfect GPA. The road out of the neighborhood wound through the trees, sunlight filtering through like forgiveness. My phone buzzed 3 times in rapid succession. I didn't need to look to know who it was. Sophia, then Mom, then James, probably threatening legal action over the car. I didn't answer. Not yet. Let them sit with the silence I had carried alone for years. 20 minutes later, I pulled into a hotel near downtown Boston, a place I'd reserved weeks earlier, just in case the reunion became too unbearable. At the time, I had told myself it was just preparation. Now, I saw it clearly for what it was: a backup plan for self-preservation. The valet didn't blink as I handed over the keys to the Mercedes. I checked in, took the elevator up, and dropped onto the edge of the bed, like a statue finally allowed to crumble. My purse still hung from my shoulder. I slipped the envelope back inside carefully, like it was something sacred. Not because it needed protection, but because it had finally served its purpose. The truth didn't need to scream to be heard. It just needed to exist. The first call I answered came 2 hours later. Sophia. Liz. Her voice was hushed. "Are you okay?" I stared at the ceiling, letting her words sink in. "Yes," I said. "I think I am." She exhaled in relief. "It's chaos here. You left, and everything just imploded." "What happened?" Dad read the test. Right there, at the table, and he didn't deny it. Of course he didn't. What could he say? DNA doesn't leave room for negotiation. Sophia continued. He tried to redirect, said something like, "I've raised her since birth, none of that changes the past." But the room, Liz, no one knew what to do. Mom went white. James pulled Dad into his study. "You detonated a bomb." "No," I said gently. "I just stopped holding it." Sophia was quiet for a long moment. "Then he told Walter Peterson you owe your success to him. That the car was you finally applying his principles." I swallowed. "I know. I heard him." Her voice broke a little. "I'm so sorry. That more than anything almost undid me." I wasn't used to anyone in my family saying sorry. Certainly not for what had been done to me. And definitely not from the one person who had always tried to soften the blow. After we hung up, I went to the window and stared out at the Boston skyline, the lights like stars trapped on Earth. Somewhere in that city, Richard Matthews was probably on the phone with his lawyer working damage control. Probably crafting a narrative where he came out noble, misunderstood, magnanimous. But not this time. Because this time, I'd spoken first. This time, I left the envelope on the table and took my name and my voice with me. The next morning, my mother called. I didn't pick up at first. I let her voicemail play in full, her voice calm but trembling. "I never wanted you to find out like this," she said. "It wasn't an affair. It was before him. I couldn't tell you. And he said he would raise you as his own?" The voicemail ended with a soft whisper. "I'm sorry." It struck me how often women apologize for surviving things they didn't choose. She had chosen silence because she thought it would protect me. Maybe in her mind it did. But it had also cost me decades of questioning why I was never enough. I took the day to breathe. I didn't respond. I needed to be in my own space, not inside their grief. Late that afternoon, an email landed in my inbox. Subject line: Thomas Keller, request to connect. My heart stilled. I opened it. "Dear Eliza, I hope this message reaches you gently. I don't have the words yet to describe how it feels to learn I have a daughter I never knew. But I want you to know I'm open to whatever conversation you're willing to have. I'm in New York next month for a conference. Perhaps we could meet for coffee if that feels comfortable for you. I wish you peace in whatever comes next." Thomas, I sat with that for a long time. No demands, no denial, no rewriting of who I was. Just the acknowledgement I'd longed for, not from the man who raised me, but from the one who unknowingly gave me his eyes, his logic, his quiet strength. In that moment, I realized something that shook me to my core. It wasn't that Richard Matthews couldn't love me because I wasn't his. It was that he refused to. And that refusal had nothing to do with blood. It had everything to do with control. The car I bought him, the one he paraded like a trophy, It wasn't about love. It was about leverage. He saw everything I did as a threat to his version of the story that he made me, that my success belonged to him. But that envelope, those 3 pages of unshakable data, had taken the authorship away from him. He couldn't claim me anymore. Not as a daughter. Not as a product of his legacy. Not as a notch in his curated success story. And that more than anything was the loss he couldn't hide behind a brandy glass or a speech. The messages came in waves, angry, confused, pleading. Sophia kept texting things like dad's on the phone with lawyers and mom's not speaking to anyone, while James took a more direct route. 2 texts. Both surgical. Return dad's property immediately. Retract your disgusting accusations before this gets ugly. I stared at the screen in my hotel room and felt nothing. Not rage, not sadness, not even fear. Just space. Space between who I had always been in this family and who I was now. I didn't answer James. I didn't delete the texts either. I wanted them. I wanted documentation. Proof. Evidence that when the truth finally made its way to the surface, their first reaction was not shock or even concern, but to protect the family brand. I leaned back into the pillows, the city lights flickering across the hotel ceiling like echoes of a storm finally breaking. I hadn't eaten since the reunion. My appetite had vanished somewhere between the dessert and the brandy glass. It was early evening when Sophia called again. This time, I answered. "Eliza," she said immediately. "Are you safe?" "I am," I said. "Are you?" There was a pause. "Not really." I sat up. "What's happening?" She let out a shaky breath. "After you left, it was like a switch flipped. Mom went pale like the air had been knocked out of her. She walked out of the room without a word. Went straight upstairs, locked herself in the bedroom. She hasn't come out, no. Not even for Dad. He banged on the door for 20 minutes, but she wouldn't answer. She won't speak to James either." I swallowed. "And Dad making calls," she said. "Lawyers, friends, trying to get ahead of whatever narrative might spread." "So nothing's changed," I said flatly. "Control first, truth later." Sophia lowered her voice. "Liz, I think he's terrified. Not of the DNA of losing control of the family story. You've cracked something he spent his entire life building." "He cracked it," I said. "I just stopped pretending not to see the fractures." She was quiet for a while. "Then James is furious." "Of course he is. His inheritance just got complicated. He's telling people you forged the test." I laughed, bitter and soft. "Let him. The lab's certified. I kept receipts. Chain of custody. He's welcome to try. Don't respond to him. I wasn't planning to." Sophia hesitated again. "I told Mom when she was pregnant with me. Dad wasn't like this. People change. Or maybe he was always like this, and I just didn't see it until now. I didn't say anything, because I didn't know if I wanted her to see him clearly. If she did, she might break too." "He always made me feel safe," she whispered. "And now I feel like the foundation under all of us just disappeared." "Maybe it did," I said. "But maybe that foundation wasn't solid to begin with." We hung up with no promises, just silence and the thudding weight of a family collapsing inward. The next day, I met with my attorney. "I want to return the car," I told her. "Clean, official, paperwork signed. But I also want a record that it was a gift, no strings, and that it was retrieved voluntarily, not repossessed." She nodded, typing as I spoke. "We can do that. I'll draft a statement confirming the gift value and date. We'll file a release of ownership to eliminate any confusion. And I want you to include this." I handed her the lab results. She raised an eyebrow. "That's not for court," I added. "That's for context." So when his people start spinning stories, we have clarity on why the relationship is now severed. Understood. She didn't ask for details. I was grateful for that. The paperwork was finalized in under 48 hours. My attorney sent it directly to my father's office and CC'd his lawyer. I didn't attach a message. I didn't need to. The car was gone. Just like the illusion of loyalty. 3 hours after that, my mother called. "Eliza," she said, her voice hoarse. "Can we talk?" I waited a beat. "Are you ready to?" She exhaled. "I don't know, but I think I have to." So we met at a cafe. Neutral ground. Public, but not loud. She wore sunglasses even indoors. Her hands trembled when she picked up her tea. I was 22, she began, not looking at me. He was smart, not rich, not connected, but kind. His name was Thomas. He was in Boston, finishing a graduate degree. I thought we'd get married. "You didn't?" I said, not unkindly. "No. My parents were furious. He wasn't from our world. No legacy, no family money. They forced the breakup. And then I was pregnant." My heart thudded once hard. "They were scandalized," she said. "They arranged for me to meet Richard. He was charming, ambitious, cold, but willing. He offered to raise the baby as his own. In return, my father invested in his company." I blinked. That was it. The real deal. Love traded for status. A child exchanged for capital. "Did he know from the beginning?" I asked. "Yes. He said it didn't matter. That he would treat you like his own. And he didn't." She nodded, shame darkening her eyes. "He tried. But you reminded him of everything he hadn't chosen. And I told myself it was better this way. That love could come later. That you were strong. That you'd survive." "I did," I said softly. "But I shouldn't have had to survive my own father." Her eyes welled. "I know." We sat in silence for a while. She reached for my hand once, then pulled it back. "I'm not asking for forgiveness," she whispered. "Just that you understand I never stopped loving you. Even if I let someone else teach you how to doubt it." That broke something in me I didn't expect. Not anger, not pity. Just grief for both of us. For the version of my childhood that could have existed if truth had been chosen sooner. "I don't hate you," I said, "but I'm not ready to trust you either." She nodded. "Fair enough." After she left, I sat in the cafe alone, finishing my coffee with both hands wrapped around the cup. My phone buzzed once more. "James, you've disgraced this family. You think you're strong, but you're just selfish." I stared at his words and smiled. Because for the first time in my life, that didn't sound like an insult. It sounded like confirmation that I had finally walked out of the house they built for me and into the one I would build for myself. It came on a Wednesday morning. The kind of morning that didn't feel like anything in particular. Cloudy, unremarkable, the kind of gray that makes coffee taste stronger than it is. I had just stepped into my apartment back in Manhattan, suitcase still half zipped by the door, when I saw the email. Subject line from Thomas Keller. "Open when you're ready." I stood there for a full minute unmoving, the inbox screen glowing from my laptop like a held breath. I didn't know if I was ready, but I knew I was done waiting. I clicked. "Dear Eliza, I never imagined I'd be writing a letter like this. I'm sure you didn't expect to receive one either. I don't know what you've been told about me, if anything, but I want to start with something simple. I believe you. And I'm here. I learned about you just this week, and I've been trying to absorb what that means. I've spent the last few days wondering how I could have missed your existence for 32 years. And I realize now that silence, no matter how well-intentioned, can bury truths so deeply, they almost vanish. But you didn't vanish. You found your way to the truth. and that tells me everything I need to know about you. I'll be in New York for a conference next month. I understand if you're not ready to meet, but if you are, I'd be honored to sit down with you even for just a cup of coffee. No expectations, no assumptions, just a chance to begin something honest. Sincerely, Thomas Keller. I read it 3 times, not because I couldn't understand it, but because every word felt like it had been written in a language I hadn't realized I could read, one called recognition. I had no idea what Thomas Keller looked like. I had never seen his face in a photo, never heard his voice. All I knew were the fragments my mother offered over tea and trembling hands. MIT, engineering. Too kind for the Matthews family, too honest. And yet, in the quiet sincerity of that email, I felt something begin to settle inside me like gravel beneath my feet finally leveling out. I called Sophia. Thomas emailed me. I said no hello, no preamble. She gasped. What did he say? He believes me? Said he wants to meet? In New York? Next month? Are you going? I don't know yet, I admitted, but I don't feel scared. You sound calm. I am, and I meant it. After we hung up, I opened my bedroom closet and reached for a worn leather box I hadn't touched in years. It held childhood photos, report cards, birthday cards, a ballet shoe from 3rd grade. I pulled out an old picture of my first science fair. I was standing in front of a trifold board titled Market Patterns in Global Agriculture, holding a ribbon. My father hadn't come that day, but I remembered the pride I felt anyway. Looking back now, I realized that spark, the curiosity, the analysis, the structure was never him. It was never Richard Matthews. It was mine. And maybe it was Thomas Keller's too. Later that week I sat down and wrote back. Dear Thomas, thank you for your message. I've had a difficult few weeks and reading your words helped me breathe again. I don't know what this connection between us will look like, but I'd like to meet. A cup of coffee sounds like a good beginning. I'll send you the details closer to the date. Thank you for responding with kindness. That alone meant more than you can imagine. Eliza. The reply came hours later. I look forward to meeting you, Eliza, truly. And just like that, a door opened that had never even existed in my mind before. Not a replacement, not a fantasy, but a possibility. That same afternoon, I received a final certified letter from my father's attorney. I opened it without emotion. Inside was a formal release agreement stating the Mercedes was no longer in dispute. No further claims would be pursued. The envelope included one additional paragraph clearly added by Richard himself. Any further public claims of defamation will be handled through formal legal channels. The Matthews family name is not up for reinterpretation. I folded the letter and slid it into a drawer. Let him protect his narrative. I was done playing a part in it. My story was mine now. In the weeks that followed, life began to steady. I returned to work. Clients, deadlines, markets. But something in me moved differently. I no longer walked into rooms with the quiet desperation of needing to prove something. Because now I knew who I was had nothing to do with whose last name I carried, and everything to do with the integrity I carried inside. One Friday evening, Taylor and I sat across from each other in our favorite wine bar, the kind with string lights and too loud jazz. So she said, swirling her glass, "How does it feel? To be fatherless?" I teased. "No," she said, smiling, "to finally be free." I leaned back and thought about it. It feels like breathing after years underwater. She reached across the table and squeezed my hand. "You don't owe anyone silence anymore." "No," I said. "I don't." As I walked home that night, the city glowed like a pulse. I stopped near a quiet bookstore and looked into the window. My reflection stared back, still me. Same hair, same eyes. But there was something new behind them. Not softness exactly. Not steel either. Something steadier. and I thought maybe being unclaimed was the first step to finally claiming myself. She chose a quiet cafe on the Upper East Side. Nothing fancy, but not casual, either the kind of place with antique china and soft music meant to hush conversation before it even begins. It was a Tuesday morning, clear cold, spring trying to push through winter. I arrived early. My mother did too. She was already seated when I walked in, her gloved hands folded tightly in her lap posture, perfectly upright. There was no makeup on her face, just pale skin, bare lips, and eyes that looked heavier than I remembered. Not older, just stripped of the performance. She stood as I approached and hesitated, unsure whether to reach for me. I nodded a greeting and slid into the chair across from her. A waiter appeared, offered menus, then vanished again like he'd sensed we needed space. We sat in silence for a few beats. Then quietly she said, "Thank you for meeting me." "I wasn't sure I would," I replied. "But I think we're past pretending, don't you?" She nodded, then looked down at her hands. Her wedding ring caught the light, but she didn't turn it the way she usually did when she was nervous. She just stared at it. "I was 22 when I met Thomas Keller," she said. "He was nothing like the men my parents wanted me to date. He was soft-spoken, passionate about things that didn't impress my father's architecture design ethics. He wasn't from money, but he made me feel seen." Her voice shook only once, and she steadied it quickly. "I was in love with him," she admitted. "I truly was. He made me laugh in a way I hadn't since high school. He wanted to build a life slowly, intentionally. But when I told my parents, they made it clear that wasn't an option. They said he wouldn't provide the security I needed, that his potential didn't matter without pedigree." I listened in silence, arms crossed, jaw tight. "I found out I was pregnant after we broke up," she continued. "I was terrified. I wanted to call him, but I was too afraid of what that would mean, especially with my parents controlling everything at the time. They told me if I wanted to keep the baby, they'd arrange a marriage. And they did." "To Richard," I said, my voice sharper than I intended. She nodded. "He was ambitious, clever. He saw my father's connections as an asset. He offered to raise you as his own, told me we'd be a powerful family. And at that moment, I was desperate. I convinced myself it could work. I wanted to ask her why she didn't fight, why she let a man raise a child he couldn't love. But something in her face told me she already knew the question, and maybe hated herself for the answer. "I believed he would try," she whispered. "And maybe he did. But from the day you were born, he kept a distance. It wasn't overt at first, just small things. He didn't hold you as long, didn't speak to you the way he did James. He said you were too independent as a baby, that you didn't like affection." I laughed once. Maybe I stopped expecting it. Her eyes met mine. "He saw Thomas in you. Even as a toddler, your expressions, your curiosity, your stubbornness. It was like raising a reminder of everything I'd chosen not to have." "So he punished me," I said quietly. She flinched. "Yes. And you let him." Tears welled in her eyes. "I did. For a long time we didn't speak." She reached into her handbag and pulled out a small photograph folded at the edges, the colors faded. She handed it to me. It was her. Young, laughing, hair down, standing beside a man in a gray sweatshirt with MIT lettering and messy dark curls. Thomas. My father. Not Richard. Not the man who'd belittled me for decades while posing as a patriarch. He never knew, she said. "I never told him about you. That's on me. You kept us from each other." I thought I was protecting everyone, she said. "But in doing that, I hurt you the most." I stared at the picture. I couldn't see much of myself in him from that angle, but I didn't need to. I felt it somewhere deeper, a vibration I couldn't name. Why did you never tell me? I asked. Not even when I got older. Not even when it was obvious I wasn't treated the same. I was afraid, she said, that it would destroy what little connection you had with Richard. That you'd hate me. That it would make everything worse. I already felt like a stranger in that house, I said. The only thing worse than being treated like I didn't belong was thinking I was the reason why. She reached for my hand then, slowly, unsure, but I didn't pull away. I can't go back and change any of it, she said. But I want you to know, I see it now. I see you now. We sat like that for a while, hands resting on the worn wood of the table, the city moving around us on the other side of the glass. She didn't make excuses. She didn't ask for absolution. She just stayed. And maybe that for now was enough. When we stood to leave, she handed me a card. I opened it later on the subway. Inside was a letter. Handwritten, careful script. You were never the mistake. The mistake was believing you could be hidden and still feel whole. I thought silence would protect you. I see now it only made you doubt yourself. I'm sorry I wasn't stronger then. I want to be now. If you'll let me. It didn't fix everything, but it broke something open that I didn't know I'd sealed shut. That night, I stood in front of my bathroom mirror and looked at myself. Same eyes, same mouth, same quiet questions. But for the first time, I wasn't searching for her love. I was deciding if she'd earned mine. The luxury car sat idle in my building's underground garage for weeks. The silver Mercedes that once symbolized status inheritance and silent expectation had become something else entirely, a weight. A reminder that everything my father ever gave came with a price tag, sometimes financial, but always emotional. He didn't come after me himself. Of course he didn't. Instead, I got a polished letter from a Manhattan law firm on ivory paper, slid under my apartment door by a courier in a tailored navy suit. No call, no text, no email. Inside was the same voice he had always used, just dressed up in legal language. Dear Ms. Eliza Matthews, it has come to our attention that the 2020 Mercedes-Benz GLC 300 registered under Richard Matthews Holdings is still in your possession. As this vehicle was a gift conditional upon family relations and estate expectations, as previously communicated verbally, our client respectfully requests the return of said vehicle by the end of this month to avoid further legal action. Cordially, Thomas R. Langley Esqueros. I read the letter once. No emotion. Then folded it neatly and placed it on the kitchen counter beside my tea. Conditional love, dressed in car leather. I didn't need it anymore. 3 days later, I drove the car one last time, across the city. Through the neighborhoods I used to walk in ballet flats pretending I belonged to that family in a golden frame, polished, prestigious false. The firm was on East 61st. I parked in front without warning. No valet, no announcement. The receptionist blinked at me as I stepped through the door, holding the keys between two fingers. Can I help you? I smiled. I'm here to return something that was never really mine. Within 5 minutes, the attorney arrived. Smooth tie, too much cologne. That practiced half-smile that lawyers wear when they think you're bluffing. I'm Eliza Matthews, I said before he could introduce himself, though technically I'm only Matthews on paper. I placed the keys on the desk. No statement necessary, I added. Just be sure to tell him I returned it with a full tank. He looked surprised. You understand the legal implications. Oh, I understand completely, I said. This was never about a car. It was always about control. And I'm done letting him park his power in my life. Without waiting for a reply, I turned and walked out. The keys stayed behind. And just like that, I was free of the last tangible thread tying me to Richard Matthews. Later that evening, Sophia came over with 2 bottles of red and a tote bag full of takeout. She sat on my couch like it was sacred ground. "Okay," she said, dramatic. "Tell me every second." I did, from the letter to the drive to the lawyer's face. "And how do you feel?" she asked, pouring the wine. I thought about it. "Clean," I said. "Lighter. Like I finally stepped out of a contract I never signed." She nodded. "You've been carrying their conditions for years, even when they weren't spoken." "I know." We clinked glasses and ate in comfortable silence. That night, I slept deeply. No dreams, just rest. When I woke up the next morning, there was a voicemail on my phone. Not from him, from my mother. "Eliza, I heard about the car. I want you to know I'm not upset. In fact, I admire you. I never had the courage to reject what was given conditionally. I want to be part of your life without conditions too, if you'll let me." I didn't call back. Not yet. But I saved the message. I opened my email and found another one from Thomas Keller. "Hi, Eliza. I'm finalizing my New York schedule. Are you still open to meeting? I'll be in Midtown on the 16th and 17th. Let me know what works best for you. No pressure, just hope." It didn't feel like fate. It felt like choice. For the first time in my adult life, I felt like I was standing in a place that was truly my own. No agenda. No debt. No role to play in someone else's performance. I wasn't the dutiful daughter. I wasn't the disappointment. I wasn't the silence between other people's secrets. I was just Eliza. And for once, that felt like more than enough. The gala was for the Architectural Preservation League, a black-tie evening in the penthouse ballroom of the Sullivan Hotel, overlooking Manhattan. Old families, old buildings, even older reputations. I didn't go to be seen. I went because Thomas Keller asked me to. He had 2 lectures that week and was one of the featured honorees. I hadn't seen him in person yet. We'd exchanged messages, warm, cautious, full of layered sentences that said more than they wrote. But this would be the first time I'd look into the eyes of the man whose DNA changed everything and feel quietly whether it mattered. I wore a slate gray gown. Simple. Sharp neckline. No jewelry, but my mother's old sapphire studs, something borrowed from the past, even if she hadn't known their meaning. When I entered the ballroom, Thomas was already there. He stood near a display of historic building models, talking to an older man with wire-frame glasses. The moment he saw me, he paused. His face shifted not in surprise, but recognition, as if he already knew how I moved before he saw me do it. "Eliza," he said softly. We didn't hug. We didn't rush. We simply stood still for a moment in the noise, studying one another. "I wasn't sure you'd come," he added. "I almost didn't," I admitted. "But I've spent enough of my life avoiding what belongs to me." He smiled then, not just with his mouth, but his eyes. It was startling, like seeing a trait you never understood in the mirror suddenly mirrored back fully formed. A tilt of the head, a quiet patience, the kind of calm that doesn't shrink to please a room but lets the room adjust around it. We sat together for the ceremony. Richard was there too. Of course he was. Not as an honoree, but as a guest of a sponsor. He arrived with James and several board members from Matthews Holdings, his shoulders squared, like always scanning the room for who mattered and who didn't. He didn't see me at first. Even when I passed his table on my way back from the restroom, he looked right through me. Like I was just another woman in heels, with no legacy of use to him. But when Thomas Keller was called to the stage, and I walked beside him, he looked again. And this time, he didn't blink. Thomas's introduction was brief, but meaningful. His restoration work had saved dozens of early-century buildings. He was praised for his ethics, humility, and quiet impact. Then came the moment I hadn't expected. Tonight, Thomas said at the podium, "I'm honored not only for my work, but for something more personal. For many years, I believed the most meaningful legacy I would leave behind was structural. But sometimes, life surprises you." He looked at me sitting at the front table. Calm, still, whole. "I'd like to introduce someone, a guest who until recently didn't know I was part of her story. And yet, she is already the best chapter of mine." The room hushed. "Eliza Matthews," he said, though I suspect she's redefining that name as we speak. A few people turned to look. I rose slowly. I didn't speak. I didn't smile for cameras. I just walked to the stage, shook his hand, and stood beside him, while the room applauded gently, mostly out of confusion, some out of curiosity. Richard stared. Not with anger, not with pride, just stunned silence. I didn't need to explain myself to him. Not anymore. That night, after the gala, I walked alone across the city. No car, no driver. Just heels on pavement and a new wind in my lungs. At home, I poured a glass of wine and opened my laptop. The website I had been building for weeks was ready to publish. Keller and Matthews Restoration plus Ethics. A joint architectural initiative focused on preserving underserved historical structures in inner cities. Not for fame, not for funding, but for the people who had always lived in the shadows of buildings someone else claimed to protect. I clicked publish, and with that one silent act, I reclaimed not just my story, but the blueprint of who I would become. A few days later, I received another letter. Not from a lawyer this time, from Richard. "Eliza, I don't understand your choices. I don't agree with them. But I've been told that the truth is no longer something I can control. So this will be the last time I reach out. You've made your position clear. Don't expect an apology. Dad. No salutation, no warmth, no accountability." I folded the letter and slid it into a drawer labeled Inheritance. It didn't contain money, just lessons about power, distance, and what happens when silence isn't loyalty, but survival. A week later, I received another envelope. From Thomas. "I have no interest in replacing anyone, but I would like to know you if and when you're ready. There's a cafe in Hudson I go to on Saturdays. They have terrible coffee, but great light. Come sit with me sometime." I kept that one on my fridge. Because some things, when given freely, are worth keeping. This story wasn't about exposing someone. It was about unlearning the belief that power belongs to the ones who speak the loudest. Sometimes it belongs to the one who walks away and builds something in silence. If this story stirred something in you, subscribe to Revenge with Seren, where dignity speaks louder than destruction.